Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Mursaleen walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen amma ba'd. My dear respected brothers, elders, please move forward, complete the lines, don't lean against the wall if you have, unless you have a physical disability. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has gathered and guided us here up to this very moment of the deepest wisdom that is available to any man, and that is the wisdom to put our forehead on the ground in sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Bear witness and testify, if it is my last permitted act, that there is no one worthy of our worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one worthy of our praise except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one worthy of our devotion except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 1400 years ago, a human being, a man named Muhammad ibn Abdullah, came to this earth and was blessed with the last final perfect revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind. We know this book today is the Holy Quran. Testify that there is no deviation, no distortion, no departure from the truth in this book. We say these things in English so that we may understand them. We say them in Arabic so we may remember them. When we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is the constitution that binds Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and mankind, and therefore man to each other. As to what follows. Not like me usually to inject a personal note into these things, but as has been previously announced, my father passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to thank everybody in the masjid, and many people who I have no idea how they got my phone number, but thank you for everybody for calling and your prayers, your du'as, all this sort of thing was very much appreciated. Many of you have asked me to say something about my father, but I will tell you that he would have disliked it. He would have disliked it. He would have disliked to be praised in any way, because he believed he was a Muslim and he followed Islam. And anyone who follows and does his duty, that is enough. However, in one modest concession, hopefully he forgives me if we meet him on the other side, I will tell you instead stories about great Muslim men, many great Muslim men, so they may come to understand not only your own parents and grandparents and what they go through on your behalf, but also so that you may understand this deen in perhaps a way that you didn't before. For I will tell you, when I was a young boy, I didn't really understand my parents when I was young. I grew up for a period of time here in the West, and I thought my parents weren't particularly fashionable. They didn't seem to talk to each other like those people I saw on TV, and smile a lot, and seem to be very, affectionate to each other. I never heard them say I love you either to themselves or to me. They seemed very severe, very dark people. When I was a young boy, they seemed a lot different from those people I saw on TV or the Western people around me. As time grew and various events that I will narrate to you occurred in my life, I began to see this very differently. And my hope is that perhaps this khutbah may help those of us who grew up in the West understand our parents who came from the East and understand them perhaps in a different way. Because the Eastern man and the Eastern woman are rarely given to long, elaborate explanations of what they think and why they think. They believe that honor is in the doing rather than in the telling, and that most things are absorbed the way a plant absorbs water, by constant exposure and nothing else. So the first story I will tell you is about the richest man in the world, who I happen to have met. Not known to be the richest man in the world because all of his money is tied up in private companies. He's a man from Yemen. I won't name him. But I was on some business in Saudi Arabia many years ago, and the business was directly with the royal family of Saudi Arabia. If anybody knows anything about who has money in this world, I will tell you it is the royal family of Saudi Arabia. So when the royal family of Saudi Arabia tells me that I'm about to meet a man, or a man is asked to meet me who they say is the richest man in the world, it comes with a different level of credibility than what you read in Fortune or Forbes magazine. Anyway, this man is a very wise man. He started from Yemen with a single camel, and he began trading. He called business trading. He was old. And then in the end he expanded to Pepsi, to diamonds, to oil and gas, to all of these things. It was all trading to him. And so when we met, he had as many people around him. He was an older man, small like, the Yemenis are not always as tall. The Saudis are very tall, but the Yemenis are shorter. He had his beard. He grabbed me by the chin. He said, I was speaking Arabic, and my son who became a friend of mine, he says, my son will translate for you what I say. So, okay. I said, respected uncle, why have you asked to meet me? I was curious. And he said, well, you have a very interesting business. At the time, our business sold very advanced technology, which I couldn't understand how this man in his 70s or 80s would understand. I said, but why me? I'm not the owner of the company. And then he sits down, he looks at me very carefully, and he shoos everybody else away except his son and me. So I knew what he was going to say was significant. He said, whenever I look at a business, I always ask for a picture of everybody who works in the business. And I always ask for a picture after there's some big event, some success, something they're celebrating. And in this picture, you will see many people. Most of them will be smiling and happy. You know how I decide who really is important in a business? I look for the man who does not smile. Then he brought everybody back. And I thought about this on the flight when I left Saudi Arabia, and I realized he was right. Because the men who do not smile are always concerned with the obligation, the duty, the drive, what they have to do to fulfill whatever it is that's being celebrated. For them there is no rest, no sleep, no celebration, no party, no drunkenness, none of this. Because they know that whatever has been committed, they now have to do. And so when you see a picture of somebody and there's a gigantic celebration in a company, the first thing or in any group of people, the first thing you should do, the first thing you should understand, look to the one who does not smile. And in this small way, maybe you'll understand why your parents don't always either. Because they would understand that whatever has happened, the responsibility to you tomorrow continues, the responsibility to you the next day and the day and the day and the day after. And they're thinking about that as much as they're thinking about what has also occurred in the immediate moment. So many of the men I talked to you about today will be men who did not smile. And so the first story I'll tell you is about an uncle of mine, rather than my father. It was an uncle of mine. I was a fairly young boy, and he also happened to be in Saudi Arabia at that point. He is high up in the military in Pakistan. As you know, I'm from Pakistan. My parents are from Pakistan and Afghanistan. I was born here. And so he said that at one point he sat with everybody, and he says, okay, you know, you're 8 or 6 or whatever age I was. What do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, Uncle, I wish to give Pakistan the bomb. I wish to be a nuclear engineer, which is ultimately what I ended up studying. And you can record all of this. Nothing I say is hidden from anybody anymore. And I said, I wish to give them the bomb. And then I wish to be a soldier. And I wish to defend the country. And he looked at me a very long time. And he knew I was serious. And lesson of this, when you talk to your children and they say something, don't always assume they're not serious. Sometimes when they say something, they're as serious as you could be. They know this in their life. Because I'd read the stories of the companions and all this, and this was what I was going to do. And he said to me, Beta, and there were tears in his eyes, our army is not an army worth giving the bomb to. And our army is not one worth fighting for. And he had dedicated his whole life to this, so he knew. I said, what about some other Muslim country? And he shook his head, and he said, no, they're not ruled by good people. And so I realized how painful it must have been for a man who spent his entire life in an organization to admit to me that the organization was not worth good people. That there was so much corruption in the Muslim world that none of them deserved weapons because they'd probably use them on their own people rather than anybody else's. There was pain in his eyes. I said, Uncle, then what should I do? He said, listen to your father. And that was all he said. And I didn't understand this at the time because my father was a professor. A professor know anything about soldiers or conquering countries or all those things I'd read of the great companions, Khalid bin Walid and Tariq bin Ziyad and Muhammad bin Qasim and all these great men. And there was my father. He was a short man, and it was all of this. And so he never allowed me to say this, so I will tell you this now because now he's passed. But we used to visit 2 old Pathans. We were Pathan and pay respects to them every day and drink tea with them every day. I hated tea, but he ordered me to drink it because old man gave it to you, so you can never refuse courtesy from somebody. So one day we were driving, and there was a group of people, Nigerians. We lived in Nigeria. He set up a university there, trained people, this kind of thing. There was a group of people there, and all of a sudden, all of them began running away from one man. One man was lying on the ground, big man. If you know anything about Nigeria, Nigerian men are some of the biggest, strongest men in the world. Really. I mean, when you look at the World Sprinting Championships, you'll see people from so-called Jamaica and all the Caribbean countries. Actually, if you look back long enough, they're all Yoruba tribe from Nigeria, if you look. It was the greatest for the last 15, 20 years, if you trace the descent. They came over, they were forced here, but really they're some of the strongest men on earth, naturally. They're just big like that. So as this big man went down, everybody runs away. Everybody runs away. And the reason they run away is that in Africa, if a man goes down with a strange illness, you run away. And the reason you run away is because you could be dead next within half an hour or minutes. There are many diseases in Africa which even the local people know there's no answer to. So if somebody is in a strange way, if you value your own life, you go away. So my father stops the car. He's a professor, right? He knows all of this, biology, all of this kind of stuff. Everybody runs away. He goes to one of them, he said, take my son home. So he takes, but I would refuse. So I said, okay, I'm going to watch. So this guy probably outweighed my father by, I don't know, 200, maybe at least 150 pounds. And I saw this little man, who I thought was a professor, pick up a man 150 pounds bigger than he was, throw him on his shoulder while he's still vomiting and convulsed in diseases, jump into his car and drive. And I was told to go home with this other person, and not to ever speak of this while he was alive again. So then, 1 day passes, 2 day passes. Finally, I work up the courage to come to him. I said, Dad, why did you say never to speak of this? He says, because maybe I could be dead in 2 days because of the disease. And then I said, and I didn't want your mother to know. She was very angry with me. And then I said, okay, well, why did you pick him up then in the first place if you were going to be dead in 2 days? And then he says, in life, when a man goes down, there are only two kinds of people. There are the people that run away, and there are the people that go back. In this house, we go back. And I never raised my voice to my father for the rest of my life. So you see, this is what the men who do not smile are really like. You may go your whole life. They'll never tell you what they did, never tell you what they sacrificed for you. They'll never tell you how hard life can sometimes be, because they don't believe that is their right to do that. They believe they have a duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge and decide whether they fulfilled that duty. And all the applause and cheering and all this Hollywood, yes dad, no dad, or yes mom, I love you this, I love you that. This is like so much noise. I don't speak ill of people who communicate in that way with their parents. I understand it. But as time has gone on, the wall that I used to see in my parents and the wall you will see in your parents if they're from Asia, behind that wall is a garden. And in that garden are many, many, many valuable and beautiful things. But you must have patience sometimes to see over the wall, because you are not always old enough or wise enough or mature enough to understand what is on the other side of that wall. And so that wall exists sometimes for your own protection. For if you knew all the suffering your mother went through to bear you as a child, maybe it would make it hard for you to enjoy life even at all, and she wouldn't want that. And Rasulullah ﷺ teaches us about this in his own way when he says that you cannot even repay your mother for your whole life for one kick you gave her when you were in her womb. So this is why our parents are sometimes quiet. They don't talk too much. They don't tell you all about what they did in their day or what their feelings were about everything. They have this wall because they are shielding the garden so that when you are ready, from time to time, you will look over the wall and you will see what is in that garden. Once again, another time, I was with somebody, a great man in business, not my father, a great man in business who encouraged me to launch my own business. I used to ask him for advice all the time about all these things. And in the beginning, things were very, very rough. So one day, it was 11 o'clock at night, he was explaining something to me, and I said to this friend of mine, I said, why do you spend so much time with me when things don't seem to be working? And he said, you know something, I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a farm, and you know, in a farm, what you do, you put a seed in the ground. And on top of that, you put manure. You know what manure is. I don't want to disgrace the mosque by talking to, but it comes from the outside, and after animals digest the food, when they go to the washroom, you get manure. So as a farmer, you put manure on top of it. So, and then every day you water these seeds. Every day you water them. So all you're doing all day is pouring water onto you know what. For many months, you're doing this, and you see nothing happening. Nothing happening underneath the ground. And then one day you see something come out from outside that pile of you know what. And outside that pile, you suddenly see a little sapling. And then you see more and more, and it's very weak. And if the wind is strong and you don't protect it, it could blow up and destroy itself. But then one day, what's in there becomes a tree. Big, strong, gigantic tree. Tree that lives for 100 years, even after you and your children and your grandchildren are dead, that provides shade and protection. Tree that even when the branches fall will provide a house for someone for another 100 years. So he said, you see, I look at everything as though it's farming. And to me, you're a tree. And all of this stuff you're complaining about, this is just the manure that you put, that you have to water every day in order for it to reach the point at which it can go off on its own. He says, at the end of the day, you ask me why I support you. This friend of mine said, older man, He said, I support you because you're my tree. Another man who did not smile. So you see that in life, we have a different way of looking at the world than other people do. You know, once upon a time, there was an old lady who was kidnapped by basically terrorists and pirates in that day. She was on her way to Hajj. She was on her way to Mecca, but they used to sail near the coast to get to Mecca. She was kidnapped by people from a portion of India that had never been successfully conquered by anybody. And the reason it had never been successfully conquered is these people fought with elephants. If you ever stand in a zoo or anywhere next to an elephant, it's a terrifying animal if it's running at you. It's a huge animal, much bigger than a tank. Much bigger than a tank. And unlike a tank, it's alive. It comes at you, it's alive. So these people, they fought with elephants. Also, they had something which in our language we call bhang. It's heroin. It's like opium. So when you hit somebody who is on this drug, they don't feel anything. So when you go to war with somebody who is like this, you're scared because you cut them and they keep attacking you. So for many years, the pirates and the people in this part of India, nobody had ever attacked them. So they used to rob people. So they robbed this Muslim lady, they kidnapped her, they killed all the people on the ship, they kept her alive, almost everybody, and she said, you know something, you made a big mistake because I'm Muslim. And they laughed, and they said, so what? And she said, and my caliph will come for me. And they said, okay, we keep you alive, and we see if your caliph will come to the jungle in India for you. So they said, okay, take her servant, throw him over the water, give him a boat, and tell her caliph, here is our address. You come get her. So the caliph was a hard man at the time, not always rightly guided, but he had some good qualities. So he calls all his generals together. And he says, you know, a woman was coming, an old lady was coming for Hajj. And she was robbed, and she was kidnapped, and the people on her boat were killed. And the people who did this dared us to come get this old lady. And all the generals in the room started talking about politics and economics and all these advanced things and why it was very difficult and no one had beaten this Indian army and elephants and diseases and jungles. And there was one guy in the entire room who listened. He was very young. He was very, very quiet, listened, and then he lifted his hand and he said to his Khalifa, I will bring her home. This man's name was Muhammad bin Qasim. He said, my only condition is that I will not force anyone in the army who is under my command to go with me. And now they thought, not only is he crazy, he is stupid. Because if people are given a choice, do you want to march to India in the jungle to fight elephants and people who feel no pain for one old woman? You know, they're all going to quit. Who's going to come? But Muhammad bin Qasim knew something that other people didn't know, which is not the size of the army, it's the quality of character inside it and the commitment to our deen and our way that defines success or failure. Just as Prophet Sulaiman and Prophet Dawood knew later in the Holy Quran when it was asked, when they had to fight on behalf of the children of Israel, and they said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them a commandment, said nobody should drink water after a long march. And everybody who drank water, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, kick them out of the army. So only the people who followed his command were left. And they defeated the people that were attacking them. So Muhammad bin Qasim knew this story, and he knew this. So he had a smaller army. So he invented about 15 things that are part of modern life just to feed and support his troops along the way. Vinegar, fractional distillation was invented in the army of Muhammad bin Qasim. That's how you get oil out of the ground, and chemicals. He invented it just because his soldiers liked vinegar. And they couldn't get vinegar when they were marching a long way. So many scientific inventions. People are just a soldier to do all of this, you see? So finally they come, and they have these people on the other side, and he lays out a strategy to defeat the elephants. And then they have these spears and all of these things to defeat the elephants, and they lay them out, and he says basically, okay, he puts one spear ahead of everybody else's. And all the bravest men in the army who had marched all this way wanted to be the one to carry the spear. And he's not asking anyone for that. As the elephants start charging, he walks first and holds the spear. This is why people died for him. So at the end of this, they defeat the Indians, destroy them because they had a better strategy. All of India was open to them because after they saw this, people were terrified of the Muslims. And the old lady asked to speak to him. And because he was a respectful good boy, he didn't say, I'm the conqueror of India and all of this. He went to visit the old lady with respect. And she asked him, because she heard of the whole story from the soldiers, everything that was done. She said, why did you do this when nobody else would? And he looked her in the eyes, and this man who did not smile said, because I said I would. And he left. These are the kinds of people that built the world as we know it today. They didn't build the world with PR agents. They didn't build the world with press. You and I, we believe in Islam, and we believe these things are true because we lived next to people who made them true. When people say that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ never lied in his life, if your parents lied every 2 minutes to you, you would find that very hard to believe. You would say, as people say of the stories the Greeks told, that that's a myth. But if your parents went your entire life and never lied to you about anything, you don't find it strange that Rasul ﷺ never lied about anything. If your parents never stole money from anybody in their entire life, you don't find it strange that someone like Muhammad bin Qasim would return every single dinar that was stolen from people back to the people in whose hands it was. You don't find it strange that Khalifa Umar bin Khattab would have one of the great companions of Islam whipped because of a minor variation in the amount of money collected in a war that should have gone to the poor, even after this man risked his life over 50, 60, 70 times for the people of that he was around. You don't find these stories strange because what other people think of as myths, you think of as real. So what I'm saying to you is that our job, the new generation of those who perhaps won't smile, or at least not that often, our job is to make what a whole generation of people think are myths real. And we make those myths real because we live and conduct our lives in a way where it is not strange or surprising to people that stories they hear about people 1400 years ago are true and alive here, today, and now. What my uncle was trying to say to me in so many different words was that sometimes you don't need an army in order to be a great soldier. Sometimes you have a quality in your heart that leads you towards nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the only quality that we have ever needed. Unfortunately, our ummah and our deen and our way of life is under attack not from anyone else except from those of us who are so-called in positions of authority, who have no character, no heart, no spirit, and no love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have butchered our governments, they have butchered our armies, they have made a joke of our school systems, our hospitals, and every single aspect of our lives. But just because the leaders are in a certain way does not mean their followers have to follow them. In fact, their followers can create their own army. It could be something as simple as their family, where they devote their lives to instilling La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah in every member of their family, where they do what they say and say what they do, where they honor their prayers and what their prayers mean, where they look after people who are weaker themselves, even at the expense and risk of their own lives. If you have this kind of commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will see that within one generation, things that other people thought of as myths would in fact be true. Remember that we have this deen because of one man who followed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commitment and teachings, followed it at the risk of his own life, followed it at the expense of the laughter of everybody else around him, followed it when people said he was mad or crazy or possessed or all those other things. But people who lived next to him, they knew. They knew who he was. And that's all it took to make everything he said real. They knew who he was, they knew what he believed, they knew he was one who did not lie. They knew he was one who did not steal. They knew he was one who was already successful and yet and had no reason for himself to gain by anything that he was saying. They knew he was one of the men that did not smile or smile too much. And in this, there is a linkage from that one man to all the greatest men who have ever lived. Our job is very simple. Our job is to decide if we respect these people and what they stood for. Our job is to understand the things that they believed, the order in which they did them. Our job is to understand the book that they lived and died for, the Holy Quran, and the way that they followed that book, which is what we call the Sunnah. When we say we're Ahlul Sunnah, we say that we love someone so much, not that we send them cards on Father's Day, but that we dedicate our lives to doing the things they did, defending the values they had, and looking at every institution in life that didn't have those values and changing them. This is what it means. In the Holy Quran it says if you say that you're part of the family of a messenger, that you follow that messenger. If you say you love him the most, then you follow him the most. This is how we express what we express. Not because we cry or dance or hold large firecrackers or celebrations. Because the quality of what is in one man's heart is far bigger than what is in 1,000 fireworks or explosions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, guide us, and carry us to that place where we may understand more of the greatest Muslims who ever lived. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. My brothers, respected elders, sisters in Islam, our way of life is constantly under attack. It's under attack by people who don't understand it. It's under attack by the people that call themselves our leaders, by people who speak with no understanding or meaning, and frankly by people who would lose a lot because of the corruption of the current system in all different parts of the world. These people have a vested interest in making us look like fools, uncultured, uncivilized, silly, angry, fanatic. You pick the words, you've heard them all. There's none of them that I'm going to say that are any different than the ones we've heard. And part of our problem, perhaps, is that the way we were raised or the way we were brought up is to be quiet, is to be silent, is to let our actions speak as opposed to our publicity agents. I can always remember the day when, again, this is not a surprise to most of you who know me. I went to university, I think, the first time when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was quite proud of myself because I was ignorant. I did well in school. I thought I should celebrate this. I always remember my parents saying to me, in our village, there are some people that when the rooster crows in the morning, they think this is worth news. And after that, I became very silent about these kinds of things. Because what is the point? Right? What is the point of celebrating? What you think you do well, somebody else does something else well too. Somebody else wins the Olympics, somebody else cures cancer, somebody else makes money, somebody else is a great cook. So who are you to celebrate what you think you do well? It implies everybody else does nothing well. And could you really be that stupid? And so I got this, and after that I never made a big deal about it, and I was very thankful and grateful to my parents for understanding this. And to this day, when I hear a chicken crow, I always think about that particular saying. I always ask myself if I spoke too much or too soon. My father would never give a khutbah. Never. The wisest man I ever met in my life. I said, why? He said, because there's always someone who knows more than you. And one day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you if you spoke when he should have. And you will be accountable for what the people didn't hear from him. So this is our way. This is our thing. This is who we are. We don't look glitzy. The reason our parents don't dress well some of the times and keep up with the fashions is because they're worried about the food that you might have tomorrow. I can always remember the day I first made money in business. I remember it was a big money for me at the time. It was $10,000 or some. Anyway, I brought it in cash to my parents. So I was going to show them what a successful man I was. So I gave them this money in cash, and I said, you take it. You spend it on whatever you want. So my parents, they took it, put it in an envelope, all the bills, everything else, and put it behind the thing. Anyway, a couple years later, business ran into some difficulties. Parents could see I was stressed at dinner. How is the business going? Well, the business is very tense. So they go back to the envelope. All of the bills were exactly in the same order as when they received them. Nothing had changed. The envelope was the same. I said, maybe you need this back. This is the character of our parents. This is the character of the people in our way of life. It's not to be flashy or to celebrate it's to look at things from a very long-range point of view. When you're 5 years old, they're already thinking about when you're 15 or 20 or 35 or 50. And they're already thinking about their responsibility to you at that age. This is how they look at the world. So they don't sit there and go out to movies and order fancy meals at restaurants. And they argue a lot about, the coupons, and they bargain for 50 cents off on this, potato. And you say, why do you do this? You're embarrassing me. They're not doing it to embarrass you. They're doing it to protect you from what you haven't seen yet and what you don't know. And what might come around the corner in this strange country where they have less family, less relatives, less system, less people to support them and to rely upon. They're protecting you from the darkness even when it is the daylight, because they know their responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to do this. So my purpose in this khutbah was not to talk really about my parents, but really to talk about your parents and all our parents. Because all of our parents, if you are in this masjid on a Friday, did something right that you would understand that you have a greater obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than anything else in the world. But you must understand that some of the things that you might be embarrassed about or not, or ashamed about, or unfashionable about, in the ways they would look different from the other people, there are very good reasons behind this. And like I say, behind that wall there is a garden, a very beautiful garden, a garden you will spend the rest of your life coming to understand if you are a person of conviction and character. Our job is to reveal that garden in our own way to our brothers and sisters in humanity in this country, so that they would come to know us and they would come to know the things that they were denied. Because many of their parents split up when they're very young, or they drink, or they have affairs, or they betray them, or they go on or they charge their children rent, or they do any of all these other things that to us are unthinkable or unimaginable. We think that the people here are lucky because they have money and wealth and resources. In reality, you could take $1 billion and hand it to somebody, or you could give them good parents. And you would say to yourself at the end of the day, if you didn't burn that $1 billion, you were a fool. You were a fool. Because the greatest gift in life that you could ever have are parents that understand our deed, our way, and to take the time to explain our deen and our way, not by lecturing you or yelling at you, but by 1,000 small actions that add up over 30, 40 years, so you know what they're saying is believed and is true. The reason Prophet Muhammad ﷺ took so long to explain the deen to people was because it took that long for them to understand what lay behind the wall and what lay within the garden. He could have delivered a speech that would have shattered everybody's imaginations because he was brilliant and beautiful and thoughtful and all those things, but this is not the way that men understand things. Men really understand things because they come to a very simple conclusion in life. Character doesn't lie. Patience doesn't lie. Virtue doesn't lie. And if you look at somebody over a very long period of time, and they are consistently good, consistently honorable, consistently humble, consistently thinking about other people than themselves, eventually, through what could even be stone in your heart, you come to a conclusion. You come to that fork in the road where you can only say one thing: I want to be like him. Islam spread even in countries where people didn't speak Arabic, and they had Arabs around them. And they couldn't even speak with them regularly. You talk about missionaries and other things, they couldn't even speak with them properly. But they saw the way that they traded, and they saw the way they treated each other, and they saw the way that there was equality in the society, and they saw the way that the people loved each other. And they looked at that, and even though they didn't speak the language, they looked over at those people, they said, I want to be like him. I don't know what it is that makes that person the way that he is, but I need to find out. Because the way that I'm living in my life right now is not that. I may have money, I may have women, I may have cars, or whatever it is that constituted wealth and success at that time, but I'm not happy. And I look at people like that, and I realize there is another way to live. And I want to live that way, and I want to be like him. That's what we call sunnah. That's it. That's all it is. You read 6,000 technical manuals. Sunnah is just all of us looking at the life of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and saying, you know what? I've looked around at everybody else, and I want to be like him. That's how this deen spread. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you, and ask the people around you, your neighbors, your friends, your children, all the people that watch you every single day of your life. Did you want to be like him? Or did you want to be like somebody else? And if you can come to the conclusion that the people around you, who know you best, who see you closest, in all the little things that you do every day, say, I want to be like him, and accept Islam, then that's your $1 trillion in the day of Jannah. Because that's the real proof and testament that you have understood what Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was trying to teach you. And our task is to create institutions that people say, I want to be like that. Schools, mosques, hospitals, all of it. Banks, companies, businesses. Our job is to make shawarma in a way that people say, I want to run a restaurant like him. Our job is to drive a taxi in a way that says, wow, I want to keep my car as clean as that guy. Our job is to speak to people in ways that say, I want to understand where he studied English. Because there's no profanity in his language, and he's sweet to people all the time. Our job is to be so clean that people say, I want to buy soap where that man buys soap. And in all these little actions added up over time, we will create the closest version to Jannah that we can here on this earth. That is Quran, that is Sunnah, that is Deen, that is our way. So out of respect and gratitude to all of the parents of everybody that's in here, I wish to say only one thing. You were right, and we will remember. We thank Allah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance.